and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a classic film and explore its history, themes, filmmaking, and the influence it has on filmmakers today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hi, I'm John Roca. I host a number of shows here about films and what have you. I'm also a voiceover actor and
an actor.
And an actor, yes, of course. I usually don't like to make the difference because some people take that personally, but yes, I'm an actor as well.
You are an all-around actor. In fact, you've acted for me.
I have acted for you, yes, which was a lot of fun.
Directed you in a Sundance selected interactive short back in 2003. That was a long time ago now.
There was a lot of makeup for that one. Yeah, I remember that.
That's right. You got to be tortured.
I did.
It's good times.
Anyway, so our film this week
is Young Frankenstein, the classic 1974 Mel Brooks, Gene Wilder homage to the famous James Whale Frankenstein.
Yeah. Such a great choice. You were saying you wanted to do a comedy, and because sometimes you can get really caught up in the idea that it's like, it's the Cine-Files. But this is such a perfect choice for us for so many reasons, because it's an homage to those classic, 1930s, 1940s horror films. Absolutely. With Frankenstein and Wolfman and Dracula. And so it was great to kind of explore this again. I can't believe it's almost a 32-year-old film, or 42-year-old film. 42-year-old film. Yeah. So,
I think I'm glad we're doing it too, because I want to get right away to say we're not disrespecting any genre. There's a tendency to elevate serious drama on top and then put action movies somewhere else and put science fiction somewhere else and put comedies way down at the bottom. And that is not how I feel at all. The famous quote, and it's from a British actor who's, and the name's out of my head right now, but dying is easy, comedy is hard, that he said on his deathbed. Yeah. Apparently his last words. May or may be apocryphal, but it's still a great quote. And comedy is one of the toughest things to do in filmmaking. And really, and this is what's made, I'll tell you, it's made me a little nervous about this podcast, because I think it's harder to talk about.
Oh, interesting.
I think we can talk about great camera movements in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or we can talk about the way the story is set up in High Noon, the ones we've done previously. Yeah. But why is something funny? That's tough to say.
It's a subjective thing. Comedy's very, very subjective. But I think when a film has been listed as the number 11 film comedy ever made, you kind of have to give it its due, I think, a little bit.
Oh, there's no question. This is a really funny movie. In fact, in comedy, I know. So when I was in film school, I did sitcoms. I did 3 sitcoms.
Okay.
And my writing instructor on the sitcoms is a guy named Sam Denoff.
Okay.
And Sam Denoff was a writer with his partner Bill Persky on the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Oh, wow.
He created That Girl, and he wrote
The Marlo Thomas Show.
And he wrote for Jerry Lewis, and he wrote. Wow. He's like an old school one of those guys.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things he said 2 things that I thought a lot about, obviously, in just writing in general, but then in particular in this film, which is one, he talks about joke density, that a good comedy, it should have 5 funny moments a page.
Wow.
That's when you're a page. Wow. That's when you're off the charts doing great. And the basic assumption in screenplays is that a page is about a minute.
Right.
So there are 5 chuckles per minute in a good comedy. And if you look at Young Frankenstein, it's definitely true.
Yeah.
It's every 10 or 15 seconds, you're getting another little moment that's funny. And the other thing he talked about, which definitely applies here, is comedy has a certain style. And you can have a joke that comes in, you go, wow, that is really funny, but it is not for this show.
Yeah.
We cannot do that funny. And I think Young Frankenstein is one that walks a really fine line in terms of what is the style of comedy in this movie. Yeah,
it's interesting because there's breaking the fourth wall, which they do on numerous occasions.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, which I don't know how in vogue that was at the time. I wonder if it was something that was new, something that was being played with, because you see that in Modern Family now, you see that in The Office, obviously, you see that as a very current thing, but you wonder how many, there have been obviously other films like Ferris Bueller's Day Off did that, but how many other films really were doing that in the 70s? I don't know.
Well, another one is Blazing Saddles.
Oh,
Mel Brooks' previous film.
That's right.
He definitely liked this.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Mel Brooks, because he is arguably one of the great comic directors of all time.
I wanted to add something when you were talking about doing comedy, how it's hard. It's especially hard to do comedy and be consistently good at it. That is really rare. Every once in a while you get a one-off, but like Mel has been good for so long. Was good for so long. Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, what I should say, Mel's had a resurgence in music.
Yes, he has.
Because, and this is, I think it's really hard. I have a theory, which maybe we'll go into in greater detail in other podcasts, but that basically most comedians get about 4 movies.
Oh,
they get
interesting.
one movie where they appear, and you go, wow, who is this guy? So Eddie Murphy, that's 48 Hours.
Sure.
And then you get another movie, which I would call their ascendant movie, where they're coming up, and that's Trading Places.
Okay.
And then you get a movie where they hit their peak, which is Beverly Hills Cop.
If you say so.
Oh, that would be my peak.
Coming to America would be.
Well, and then you get their swan song.
Oh, yeah. I see.
And that's mostly it.
I see.
And if you look at comedians, it's now my theory is not correct. You could go disprove it in places, but they don't get many more than 4. It's rare that a funny person gets 5.
It's a very good point, Steve.
People stay funny being funny is a very short-lived thing. You kind of match up to the zeitgeist of the moment, and you hit your stride, and you're hungry, and then you become...
You get soft.
Yeah, because you look, and then people make a lot more movies frequently.
Yeah.
And they're not funny.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I think you're right. You start to, because what makes you funny for most comedians now that we see is the hunger to be successful, to tell their jokes, the hunger from the pain, the hunger from the struggle, the hunger from all that. Once you achieve a certain level of fame and notoriety and money, it's really hard to get back in touch with that drove you from the beginning. It's like one of those great lines in the Rocky series was like, the greatest thing that could happen, or the most dangerous thing that could happen to any fighter, you got soft because you got complacent. Yeah. And when you get complacent, you can't find that hunger anymore. It's really hard to find that hunger anymore.
Well, and I think this is something we can say about artists in general.
Absolutely.
That there are some artists that continue to be fantastic well into their middle and older films, Kurosawa being one.
Yes, absolutely.
Continues to be unbelievable right up until almost the very end.
Yeah.
But there's some that just hit the ball out of the park in their first few movies, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So whatever was driving them at that point maybe goes away. So let's go back to Mel Brooks.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what's driving him. So he's born in Brooklyn. He goes into the army. He's in World War II. He comes back, and he's going to be a musician.
Right.
Yeah. He's a drummer, and apparently a really good drummer. Wow. His mentor is Buddy Rich.
Wow.
Yeah, that's who taught Mel Brooks how to play drums. Buddy Rich is one of the 2 great drummers of that era.
Not an easy guy to learn under, I imagine.
No, I would think so. And so from what I've heard, and I'm not a judge of drummers, Mel Brooks is not just good, he is really a good drummer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he worked in the Catskills. And for those people who don't know, the Catskills are these mountains outside of New York where vacationers from New York City would go, and there were resorts anywhere from very inexpensive to super expensive. And all of the big acts in show business would come through. And he's a drummer in the Catskills. That's where he starts to get interested in comedy.
Wow.
And suddenly, and he becomes a writer in the arguably greatest comedy writer staff of all time, which is on Sid Caesar's shows. This is a live TV show broadcast twice a night in the late 50s, early 60s. And here's the writing staff. It's Carl Reiner, who's the head writer, who goes on to make The Jerk and Oh God and all sorts of great movies, including one of my secret favorites, Summer School.
Yes. Love Summer School.
I do too. And maybe that's sad, but
no,
I really
we all have our guilty pleasures,
really
man.
And then Larry Gelbart.
Yes.
Writer of Tootsie, writer of Oh God, and the person who developed MASH for television and ran the first 4 seasons of MASH. You have Sam Simon and his younger brother Neil Simon, one of the greatest playwrights, the most successful playwright in the history of Broadway, who wrote The Odd Couple and Chapter 2 and
Brighton Beach Memoirs,
Beach Memoirs and Lost in Yonkers and on and on and
yes.
on. And for a few shows at the very end and for specials after the show ended, young Woody Allen was on the writer's staff.
Right.
So that's an unbelievable, and Mel Brooks. And I just want to tell one story because I like it a lot.
Wasn't there a woman too? Because
So Imogene Coco
yes.
is Sid Caesar's wife, who's the co-star on the show.
Yes.
And she is super funny. And anyone who wants to get real geeky and go back, you can watch some of these shows. Some of them are still to this day super, super funny.
Oh, yeah. And I mention this only because I did, we mentioned me being an actor at the beginning of this. I did Laughter on the 23rd Floor back in Tallahassee when I was at School of Florida State. We did that at one of the little theaters there. What a phenomenal phenomenal experience to do that play. Neil Simon wrote the play, obviously, but it is about his time on your show of shows. And it is such a great window into what that world was like. And so you can watch the programs now after you've read that play with a whole different perspective. And I think it's amazing what they were able to do.
It's a fantastic play. And if you're interested in that, the other one I direct you to is go watch My Favorite Year.
Yes.
Which is Peter O'Toole.
Mark Baker.
Lynn Baker and Joe Bologna, is that who plays?
Yes, Joseph Bologna.
He plays the Sid Caesar character, and it is also, it's the same era. It's definitely modeled after that show. And there's a PBS like a panel discussion with the writers. I think it happened in the 80s, and it's always stuck with me. And they're talking to Carl Reiner, and they're on the panels, Larry Gelbart, Neil Simon, Sam Simon, all these people. Woody Allen's not there. And Imogene Coco and Sid Caesar. And they say to Carl Reiner, how did you write so much great stuff? Carl Reiner says, well, we were lucky to have the funniest man in the world and the wittiest man in the world on the same writing staff. Funniest man in the world is Mel Brooks. Wittiest man in the world is Larry Gelbart.
Wow.
And the interviewer, which is the right follow-up question, what's the difference between funny and witty? And as he's finishing the comment, Mel Brooks is taking a sip of water and immediately does the biggest, most ridiculous spit take you've ever seen, practically falls on the floor drooling. And as the laughter is just dying down, Larry Gelbart very calmly says, wit is dry.
How perfect.
Yeah. It's one of the great moments of all time that I've ever seen. And it sets up who this guy Mel Brooks is, which is he will do anything for a laugh. At the time, he's not a performer.
No.
And what starts him being a performer is doing the 2,000-Year-Old Man with Carl Reiner, which they started doing at parties, which is Carl Reiner would interview Mel Brooks as the 2,000-Year-Old Man. And everyone thought this was so funny. They cut an album, it becomes this huge album, and suddenly Mel Brooks becomes a star.
But, sir, do you remember the very first book you ever read?
The first book. You don't forget the first book.
No.
No.
You remember what it was?
I was a child.
Yes.
It was a simple book in the ancient Hebrew. It was a book called Zeichem, Mochem, Ruchem.
And that translates into?
See Moses run.
Oh.
A little book. Beautiful little book.
Yes. Do you remember the story? Do you remember the story?
Well, it wasn't a big, complicated story. But it was a page turner.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those bits that people know. If you know comedy, it's one of those bits you remember that are classic, like Who's on First, The 2,000-Year-Old Man. These are all in a certain echelon, right? They're revered in a certain way by most comedians because they're so tight, they're so brilliant, and they're timeless. And that's really the most important thing.
So anyone who wants to go listen to them today, they're well worth your time.
Yes.
So we get to, so I don't feel like I'm doing a long monologue on the story.
We're getting to Young Frankenstein at some point. Yes.
At some point we have to get to the movie. He meets Gene Wilder through his wife, through Anne Bancroft, because they're doing a play together. And Gene Wilder comes on to do The Producers, which is a fantastic movie.
Yes.
Then comes on to play, naturally you cast Gene Wilder as the fastest gun in the rest in
Blazing Saddles, yes.
And then during Blazing Saddles, Gene Wilder says, I have an idea for a movie, and it should be our next movie. And that movie's Young Frankenstein.
Right. He said, and that's what, from what I read, Gene said, I'm only going to do Blazing Saddles if you do the movie, if you do Young Frankenstein, if you do my idea for a movie.
Wow.
And this is what's interesting about their relationship. Gene and Mel seem to come to each other with the same kind of confidence and ego, because you can read a lot about the clashes that they had through their times together and their times working stuff out. And I love this because people think this only belongs to like the directors and dramatic directors and actors. Like I'm sure Scorsese and De Niro have had their blow-ups. It's very legendary. Kurosawa.
Particularly when you do a lot of coke.
It's just that allegedly. We're not getting in trouble here. I don't want to get us sued. But like
he said that he did a lot of coke.
Sure. All right, fine. Then Kurosawa and Mifune. Right? There was a whole book about them.
Emperor and the Wolf.
The Emperor and the Wolf, which is a 970-page opus. Which, my God, it's still so difficult to get through. But like I think I still have it.
I think I'm like 100 pages in from like 8 years ago.
I wrote 25 pages on a yellow notepad at page 400, like all the notes to keep everything in track because there's so much, it's so dense. But it's always interesting to me because Gene is when you see him on screen, he's such a giving, funny comedian and willing to make a fool of himself. But he has these battles with Mel because Mel wants it a certain way. And a lot of times Gene is right. And Mel will say Gene is right. It's interesting to explore that.
So the most famous story, and we're going to get into this more because it is the most remarkable scene in the movie, I think, is putting on the Ritz.
Yes.
So before we do that,
Yes.
For those of you who have not seen the movie, again, we suggest that you stop listening to our podcast.
Yes.
You go immediately to iTunes, Netflix, your local video store.
Sure.
Go to your local video store. It's 252 miles away.
It's called Best Buy. Yeah. Or Target.
So pick up the movie and check out Young Frankenstein. It's still very funny. But a quick synopsis is pretty simple. This is Frankenstein.
Yes.
The difference is that it is Frankenstein's grandson, Frederick, who is now changed his name from Frankenstein to Frankenstein. To separate himself from his crazy ancestor. Yeah. He finds out that in Frankenstein's will or something that he should come back to the castle, comes back, discovers Frankenstein's original plans and goes, it could work.
Yes.
One of the great manic Gene Wilder moments that you could possibly imagine.
It could work!
Builds a new monster and hilarity ensues.
Yeah. And great cast.
Unbelievable.
I mean, there are 3 Oscar winners and 6 Oscar-nominated actors in the cast for a comedy in 1974. And this is really funny, the timing of this comedy. 1974.
Not all nominated for this movie.
Right, no, not all. Yeah, right, exactly. But Cloris Leachman and Terry Garr were nominated, I think, for Golden Globes, but I don't think they were nominated for Oscars. What's interesting is that the timing of this film is what struck me. 1974. I had forgotten, because the first time I saw this was in the early 80s, so I thought it was an 80s film. And in my mind, I guess, I'd always thought it was 82 or something like that. But it's so interesting, 1974, in the middle of these like very deep, important films like The Godfather, Apocalypse Now is only a few years away, you have The Conversation, you have all these very deep...
Chinatown comes out.
Exactly. Yeah. All these very deep films. And out of nowhere comes this homage to a time in the 40s. And it's still timeless. The movie still works, is still good. And so it's so interesting that he's able to separate himself from whatever's going on here and all the pop culture anger and frustration in Vietnam and all that stuff and give you this comedy that is lighthearted, heavy on the sexual reference jokes, but not in a way that's like offensive, and so it's just brilliant the way he did this film and the timing of it. I mean,
well, because Mel Brooks is his own thing.
Yeah,
Mel Brooks is doing movies. He's not part of the counterculture,
right?
In fact, if you look at his movies, they're all part of the culture.
Yes.
That you have the producers, which is about Broadway.
Yeah.
Then he does a Western. Then he does a horror movie.
Right.
And then he does his Hitchcock movie, High Anxiety.
And
he does History of the World, which is his homage to Cecil B. DeMille and all those guys.
Yeah.
And then he does Spaceballs.
Right.
So it's like he is reflecting the genres of the culture.
Right.
He's not smoking weed with Peter Fonda on the back of a motorcycle. Right. That's not Mel Brooks. I mean, I'd kind of like to see it, actually.
Yeah, I would too. Do you have to be on the motorcycle? Do you need to be on the motorcycle?
And then he goes into some kind of musical number.
That's right.
The cast is unbelievable. So first of all, you got Gene Wilder.
Yes.
And I think in that era, he is one of the off-the-charts most unbelievable comic actors in the world. Mm-hmm. And his comedy, at times he goes to Daffy Duck levels of ridiculous anger.
Yeah.
He's unbelievably intense.
Yes.
And dramatic. And you think of his movies. So the producers, he plays this neurotic. In Blazing Saddles, he plays this cool cowboy.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorite performances, Willy Wonka, which is just intense and weird and disturbing and scary and funny and brilliant. And then this manic, crazed performance in Young Frankenstein.
Right.
And we should take a minute just to acknowledge his hair.
Yes. That the hair gets more and more manic as the film goes on, as he becomes more involved and crazy, but still the presentation of it is so profound.
Gene Wilder hair is like, I think it's unique in film history. I don't think there's anything like Gene Wilder hair. And you kind of wonder, like, what is this moment in history where we go, that makes sense. Yeah. Let's have hair like that. Because it is It's wild, crazy, blonde Jufro.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
Yeah, well, you have that, and you have Terry Garr, you have Cloris Leachman, you have obviously, and you have Mel off screen doing little things,
cat noises.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you have all these amazingly gifted actors. Is it Frederick March? Is that? Or I'm sorry, not Frederick March. Who's the name of the German detective? Kenneth Mars, who obviously had been the crazy guy and the producers who had written the play. And so you have all these great comedic actors, and it's funny you mentioned that he was a drummer because comedy is all timing.
It's all timing.
And so when you see the best ones, you know the tightest scripts, the funniest scripts are all about timing. And I think it helps to be a musician, absolutely, to be a comedian, because it lets you know rhythm, it lets you know beat, lets you know build, payoff, then going back down, those kinds of things. And what's so fun about discovering Young Frankenstein again for me was seeing how tight this comedy was, how tight the jokes were. Even when the jokes don't 100% work nowadays, you still understand the genesis of why that joke is there at that time because of the jokes that led up to it. You know?
Well, and you have, as you said, this ensemble where they're all really funny.
Yes.
So it's not like you're turning to, okay, now Will Ferrell, give us another joke.
Right.
I don't know why I single him out.
Sure.
But it's Terry Garr does something funny. Gene Wilder does something funny. Marty Feldman does something. Marty Feldman, who just can't not be funny.
My Lord.
I mean, the scene in particular, and they talk about it in the commentary track of Madeline Kahn's arrival at where she's wearing her fox stole or whatever, and that apparently it's like 25 takes because everybody was laughing so much.
Yeah. And
you watch that scene, and the amount of funny stuff going on from all of them in the scene is amazing.
Igor, would you give me a hand with the bags?
Certainly. You take the blonde and I'll take the one in the taven.
Stop that. I'm talking about the luggage.
Yes, master.
Ladies, this way.
It's going to be a long night. If you need any help with the girls, please don't hesitate.
Madeline Kahn, I have a thing for female comedians. Like I can sometimes, if I find them even remotely attractive, to me it's like I'm just all in 1,000%. And Madeline always had my heart, like always. I thought she was absolutely beautiful, and she was absolutely very funny, and she knew how to play her sexuality in a way that was not in a way that was like, she didn't use it for benefit. Do you know what I'm saying? For advancement. She uses it because she understands how it plays in the joke. Like, it's intelligently used. In Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, all these kinds of things. Like when she has, one of my favorite scenes in the film is near the end when Frankenstein has taken her, the Frankenstein's monster, Peter Boyle, played by Peter Boyle, takes her and they have sex, and she says, "Where are you going?" And he "Oh, I see, 5 or 6 times, and you're off with the boys."
Yeah, so we can't let this scene go a little bit.
Yeah,
because this is something. It's going to be a theme throughout the show of looking at an older movie. And going, how's that play today?
Yeah,
because that scene is, and I'm going to say this in the crassest possible way.
Okay,
that scene is I'm a stuck-up bitch, and what I really need is to get raped by a guy with a really big dick. Scene.
I don't know. Is raped the right word?
Yes.
Okay.
No, what are you doing? Stop it. No. And then he is.
All right.
It is clearly a rape scene.
Okay.
And I watched it with my wife last night.
Yes.
And I had to turn to her because she was laughing. And I'm like, so it's okay to laugh at this rape scene? And my wife was kind of like, it's funny. You know? And
right.
So I don't think it's a scene you would do today. I think it's difficult, you know.
Okay.
It's like this is where we're going to do this all the time.
Yes.
We're going to go like, okay, that was for that time.
Right.
I don't think it was disrespectful at that time.
Right.
Madeline Kahn plays it great.
She does.
And she's, because I agree with you about her. She is phenomenally talented. She's got a gorgeous singing voice.
Yes.
She's beautiful. She's very smart. And one of the great things about her is she has no compunction about being made to look ridiculous.
Yes.
She will do whatever is necessary for the laugh.
Yeah.
If you watch her, she's got a great episode in early Saturday Night Live, by the way.
Oh.
Really fun to watch.
Yeah.
I think it's first season. First or second season.
Okay.
And what's interesting is she was going to play Inga.
Yes.
So she originally was going to play Inga. Terry Garr comes in to read for the role that Madeline Kahn does.
Yeah.
And at the reading, Mel Brooks says, look, actually, Madeline Kahn is going to play this role.
Yeah.
Can you come in tomorrow and read for Inga? And Inga has a much bigger role.
Yes.
So Madeline Kahn decides, I don't want the bigger role.
Yeah.
I want the smaller role to play this kind of horrible person.
Right.
Because that's where she thinks she's going to have more fun. And you can't, watching the movie, you can't imagine it any other way.
Well, this is interesting you said, because to me, it didn't strike me that she was a stuck-up bitch or a horrible person. To me, it struck me that she was with the wrong guy, which is why
Sure,
she was
absolutely.
acting that way, because
She didn't love him.
She didn't love him, and Gene knew she didn't love him, or the character, Victor Frankenstein knew she didn't love him, but. He's a guy who's lost in his world. He doesn't know who he is. He's trying to not be his grandfather. By the way, where's his dad? I would love that to be addressed at some point. It's never addressed.
Well, this is one thing. Like
Skipped a generation,
we
apparently.
often criticize a movie because it doesn't make sense.
Right.
This movie doesn't make sense, and it's fine.
Yes, of course.
It's like that. Making sense is good, but it's not necessarily the most important thing.
Especially in comedy. Right.
Let's talk about Gene Wilder's character, because I think we talked about this in other podcasts. Is Hollywood has a desire to say your main character's got to be likable.
Yeah.
This guy is not likable.
Not in any
He is
way.
a fairly horrible person.
Sure.
From the very first scene where we watch him kick a very frail old guy in the balls. And he presents that whole scene is so odd because he presents it as a vaudeville show.
Yes.
Which is his sort of, and the arrogance of him,
Right.
and the vanity of this guy is so high.
Yeah, but they're always undercutting him, right? The medical student asking the questions consistently, who is great, that guy in that scene.
Yeah, under the dictionary for smarmy, it has his picture.
Yeah, I mean, he's poking holes in Gene, and I think that's why you cast Gene Wilder because if you're going to create a character like this, you need to have someone the audience is going to go with. The audience is going to accept, not feel that he's a terrible person, just feel that he's got this kind of like harmless, just self-destructive nature to himself, and especially when he stabs himself in that scene. That tells you right there he is so out of it, he's so lost in trying to figure out who he is, that he will stab himself in fury that anyone compares him to his grandfather. And he's just a lost guy. And so it's so ironic that the one thing that he is running from is the one thing that he ends up feeling most connected to, and is able to find who he really is.
One might say destiny. No escaping that for me.
Destiny! Destiny! No escaping, that's for me! Destiny! Destiny! No escaping, that's for me!
Which is a really weird scene. That's why I say he's Daffy Duck.
Yeah,
he
that's
is
a good
this.
point.
Daffy Duck is the character who is filled with human desire,
Right.
and fear, and insecurity, and anger, and outrage, and continually makes terrible choices
Yes.
that end up hurting him, and that's why we laugh.
Yeah.
In Chuck Jones, the great famous animator, his biography, which is called Chuck-a-Muck, which is really good, and I highly recommend. He talks about the fact that that comic villains are much easier to do than a comic hero. That Daffy Duck is a comic villain.
Yeah.
He's a selfish bastard and that's what gets him into trouble.
Right.
As opposed to Bugs Bunny, who's a comic hero.
Yeah.
And that we can relate to Daffy Duck in a way we don't relate to Bugs Bunny.
Right.
And the same is true with Frankenstein or Frankenstein, is that Gene Wilder's character is like, I want to be like him too. I have grandiose ideas about who I am, and then end up being cowardly or greedy or self-obsessed, and I can relate to this guy.
Yeah, and even in his pursuit for trying to achieve the life from lifelessness, his mania is still so prevalent. Like when he flips out that Peter Boyle doesn't come to life immediately is one of my favorite scenes.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, we have to handle these, in science we learn to handle these things with dignity, a quiet dignity and grace. And as soon as everyone turns around, he flips out and starts choking this an already dead thing, and then starts pounding on its chest and then screams that he does not want to live. He does not want to live.
Nothing.
Oh, Doctor, I'm sick.
No. Be of good cheer. If science teaches us anything, it teaches us to accept our failures as well as our successes with quiet dignity and grace. Son of a bitch bastard, I'll get you for this! What did you do to me? What did you do to me?
Doctor, stop it! You kill him!
and the great look to the camera by Marty Feldman with quiet grace and dignity, that kind of thing. It's brilliant to me because that's like us. That's why we relate to him. And I think Chuck Jones makes a great point. We relate to him because that's a majority of us are pursuing something we want to do with our lives, and the frustrations that we constantly have to deal with in order to achieve them are for us off the charts. For another person looking at it from the outside, it might be funny or be like, why is he reacting like this? It's because you don't understand, because that's my journey and it means so much to me. Whereas Bugs Bunny always has the right answer,
He's always
knows exactly what to do. That's like 1% of the population. It's just why
because we want to conceive ourselves as the hero of our own story, playing out this grandiose, I'm Harry Potter fighting the bad guys, but it ends up that no, I'm more like Gene Wilder. And the opposite scene, which I think it relates to the Quiet Dignity scene, is. Okay, the monster we have him in the room, and he says, okay, I'm going to go in the room and talk to him, and whatever I say, don't let me out, which is a classic shtick.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Old classic shtick. And to the point where even I'm groaning a little bit.
Really?
And then because it's an old shtick,
I guess so, yeah.
And they go in and they do the first part, let me out, I was kidding. But then where it goes is he actually conquers that moment.
Yeah.
It turns to the monster and goes, hey there. And this so bizarre... His performance of I'm a terrified person performing this thing, and Peter, we got to talk about Peter Boyle for a moment, because Peter Boyle has to do a pantomime performance for 90% of the movie, and it's very subtle and small, and his looks and eye moves and takes to the camera are so perfect. It's to the point where when he actually speaks at the end of the movie, I'm kind of like, oh really? That's how you talk? This kind of strange New York actor guy.
Yeah, right. People. He had a life before Everybody Loves Raymond. I just want to make everybody know.
Oh yeah. He's a fantastic actor.
He really is.
And in this movie, he's the amount that he gives to just this silent performance is amazing.
Yeah. Which speaks to the knowledge that Mel had about these actors, what they were able to do, what he was going to ask them to do, and how they would be able to do it correctly to fit his film. And they do that. And Cloris Leachman too. You can't not talk about her. So great, so perfect. My favorite moments with her are when the pained expressions when Gene rejects her, the closed eyes, and I'm keeping my dignity. Yes,
like all those that scene.
Yes, what is it? Ovaltine, nothing. Thank you. All of that is great for her.
It's as if he slapped her.
Yes, yes.
And honestly, Gene Wilder's angry voice is so intense.
It really is.
Because when he says nothing, it is very much like, you'll get nothing. You stole fizzy lifting drinks, or whatever the scene is from Willy Wonka.
That's
His
right.
angry Willy Wonka, angry Gene Wilder is genuinely scary.
It is. It is. It's that nerd rage.
Yeah.
I would compare it to nerd rage that you see from people sometimes as kind of a non-medical term that you see people like flip out about this one thing and they just want you to understand what they're saying. And so you see that. But he's so harmless. Like he's so physically harmless that it works. Like I don't hate him for it. I'm still following his journey. He's so comical. And it's because everyone else it loves him so much in the film and wants him to achieve what he's trying to achieve that you go along with him, right? I mean, Terry Garr, never more beautiful than she is in this film, and just so great with the comedic time. Everything. Just
charming and funny and sweet.
And holds her own in moments.
And this is, she actually had worked a lot previous to this, including, of course, in Star Trek, the original series episode Operation Earth or something.
Sure. If you say so.
I'm a big Star Trek fan. So Terry Garr's in that.
Yes.
But this is still a big role in a big movie with powerhouse comedic actors. And she's right there in it.
She really is. And so relaxed and confident and delivers those lines, the joke lines, so perfectly. And so deadpan, so perfectly deadpan in certain moments that they're great. I mean, the whole Knockers reaction, the roll in the hay stuff, but also when she's trying to encourage him. The candle scene alone, when she's like, put the candle back, all those little things. She's great.
One of the great pieces of physical comedy.
Yeah.
And she and this is why comedy is so delicate and hard to talk about sometimes, is that she never seems to be trying to be funny.
Nope.
If you try to be funny, you're going to break it.
Yep. She's
just playing it very straight. And Mel Brooks says this throughout the commentary track. One of the great things about Gene Wilder is how incredibly serious he is about what he's doing.
Oh, yeah.
This is all real emotion. This is real serious stuff.
Yeah.
And how you do that And there's this weird fine line, whereas you do it one way and it's serious and real and it's upsetting.
Yeah.
And you do it just this slightly different way and it's really funny.
Yeah.
And that's kind of magical to find.
One of the first things they teach you as an actor when you're doing comedy is you have to commit to what you're doing. You have to believe what you're saying is the right thing. If you start to play it for jokes, you will lose the audience and you will lose yourself in the performance and you won't find the truth. And truth is where the comedy comes from, because we never for a minute doubt that he wants to bring this thing to life and he wants to get the notoriety of it and he wants to achieve something that his grandfather couldn't do, and in a way carry on the legacy in a positive way, which was still his kind of initial point from the beginning of the film, which is why he doesn't have his name pronounced in the same way. He wants to have a positive connotation to his last name.
Right.
You know?
That he has, and this is, again, things that we say about screenwriting that are frequently wrong. Like that a character must have a character arc. He must start in one place and end up in another place.
Right.
This guy doesn't have an arc. Not really. I mean, he does make a sacrifice at the end, but basically his motivation at the beginning is, I don't want to be associated with that name because it makes me look bad.
Yeah.
And then his whole motivation throughout the whole film is, I want to do this thing because it'll make me look good.
Right.
And so now we have to get to what we hinted at before.
Yes.
Putting on the Ritz.
Yes.
So I think this is one of the most remarkable scenes in any comedy film ever made.
Yeah.
And and if you hear, Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder had a huge fight about it.
Yes.
Gene Wilder wanted this in the movie, and Mel Brooks went, "You're crazy. This is stupid. This is awful." Huge fight. Yeah. Until finally, at some point in the fight, Mel Brooks goes, "No, I changed my mind. We'll put it in." And Gene Wilder says, "What changed your mind?" He said, "Well, I wasn't sure about it." Mel says this, but I wanted to see how much you'd argue for it, and you're so passionate about it that even though I don't think it's funny, I don't think it makes sense. Yeah. I think we should go do it because you argued so passionately for it. Which is, by the way, that's a good director move. Mm-hmm. Is because we don't, as a director, we don't always know what's going to work.
Yeah.
And so when you see a lot of passion from someone you really respect, you got to go like, I don't know, because it's outside of the movie establishes a reality. Mm-hmm. And this is totally outside that reality.
To me, it still worked, because.
Oh, I think it works.
Yeah. Well, I think here's the thing, because Gene said, Mel didn't want to do it. In the interviews I've read, Mel said he didn't want to do it because he thought it would ruin the rhythm of the movie, what he was trying to make an homage to.
Right.
And none of those films had any kind of musical number in the middle of it. But to me, it's very reminiscent of King Kong. It's the King Kong moment in Young Frankenstein, because he's bringing out the monster in front of everybody.
I never thought of that.
And what happens? It's great. It's fun. People are just like in King Kong. People are like amazed at this amazing creature that are captured, and they feel safe. They're all dressed up in their tuxes at night to go see this show, and it's basically they're putting a human on as a monster to be a show, And then when the light breaks, he flips out, and just like King Kong, when the chain breaks, he flips out and goes after everybody. So to me, it still worked because it's an homage to a 40s, 30s type film. So I liked it because it works for me in the rhythm of the movie, because they're basically going back and making homages to all the monster films.
I never thought of the King Kong thing.
Really?
100% right. That is exactly the structure of the scene.
Yeah.
I still think it's completely bizarre.
Yes, of course.
Because what's bizarre is not, I'm showing off the monster.
Right.
What's bizarre is lights come down, lights come on, he's in a tux.
Yes.
And we're going to do, is it Gershwin? Gershwin, I think.
Cole Porter. Yeah,
we're doing
Quentin on the Ritz.
Song.
Yeah.
We do a Cole Porter song, and a little tap dance. And in the whole way, and it's funny because when Gene Wilder presents the scientific experiment at the beginning of the film, he does it like a magician.
Yeah.
And when he presents the monster in this scene, he again does it like showbiz, which is really bizarre. And I want to point out just something that again makes no sense but is so great. Sure. When the world that he lives in the United States from the scientific experiment is clearly the 70s.
Yes.
You have dudes with long hair, it's the men and women.
Yeah, the mustaches.
We're in the 70s.
Yes.
And somehow when he makes it to Transylvania, we're now in the Gilded Age. There's no cars. Everybody's in these costumes and outfits.
Lederhosen.
And then when we have a presentation like "Welcome Scientists," that's the dialogue in the scene. The scientists at this conference are gentlemen and ladies in tuxedos and evening gowns, dressed up to the nines, who apparently bring lettuce with them everywhere.
Yes, apparently.
Like it makes no sense at all, but in a great way that's really great in a comedy.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find funniest is what upsets them. And why they finally go, boo, you're terrible, is that the monster blows the dance.
Yeah.
It's not because they seem convinced that he did actually, in fact, reanimate dead matter. It brought a creature to life, which I think would be pretty impressive. But when the dance doesn't sell, they're like, oh, kill him.
I just love the lettuce moment is so perfect for me. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Steve, because it is once again, Mel, kind of in a subtle way, showing that no matter how high we get in society, we're still kind of these primal animals and we're still going to react in stupid ways. And throwing the lettuce is so perfect in that moment because it's just these well-established scientists who are throwing lettuce, expressing their displeasure. I know, they're really huge.
Like they didn't it's not like butter lettuce or anything. No. This is like a big leafy romaine we're throwing up there. I also and also we've also waited the whole movie to hear the monster speak.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you how many times my wife and I have turned to each other and started singing "Putting on the Ritz," and the other one will go, "Put on the Ritz."
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits? Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes, or cutaway coat, perfect fits. Dressed up like $1 million trooper, trying mighty hard to look like Gary Cooper. Come, let's mix where Rockefellers walk with sticks or umbrellas in their midst.
Because that voice that comes out of Peter Boyle's mouth is so crazy and funny.
Which apparently was improvised.
Yeah.
Mel told him, just say it however you think the guy would say it. And he does it that way. I'm so surprised Gene doesn't break. And maybe there are outtakes where Gene snaps in half.
If you look on the Blu-ray, there are a lot of deleted scenes.
Are there really? Oh, I got to see those.
They break a lot.
Okay. But can we say one last thing?
Of course.
When did he have time to teach him to tap dance? And not even like simple tap dance. He was doing the old school, what do you call it, the pushback or
Flaps.
whatever. He was when he was having his solo moment. There's a term for what he was doing.
Flaps, it's called
something like a pushback or jump back.
Tap.
Yes, and it's not easy to learn tap, especially as a monster at 7 foot tall and that late in life.
Giant platform shoes.
It's giant platform shoes.
Gene dances really well.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
His 5, 6, 7, 8 after the thing is just. And then, but he also, and this is what makes makes that moment work too. He dials into the scientists. He himself starts yelling at the monster, saying, "Hey, come on, don't make me look like an idiot here."
Well, because he's not a good person. Yes, it's all about his ego. It's all about how he looks.
It's so true.
That's all he actually cares about.
So true. All right. Yes.
All right. So we've skipped a scene that I think is one of the great scenes in all of film, which is in comes Gene Hackman.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We absolutely have to talk about this scene.
So, again, I hope that you've now watched this movie.
Please.
If not, at least, I bet, go on YouTube and watch Gene Hackman and Young Frankenstein.
Yes.
Because this scene is amazing.
Yeah.
Gene Hackman and Gene Wilder knew each other from Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes.
And they became tennis buddies. And Hackman, they're playing tennis. And Hackman goes, "Oh, what are you working on now?" And Gene Wilder says, "Oh, Mel and I are going to do this Frankenstein comedy." And Gene Hackman says, "Man, I'd love to do some comedy." Now, Hackman at this moment's peaking. After French Connection.
Yeah.
And he's like suddenly this big, well-known, super intense, dramatic actor. And Wilder and Mel Brooks both go, "Can he be funny? Like, is he funny?" And Hackman goes, No, I can do it. And he comes in on the first day. They're really stressed out. Is he going to be good? And of course, he's brilliant.
He is brilliant. But it's the perfect, if you're going to do comedy as a guy the way he's built, Hackman is, it works perfectly for Hackman.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because he's very serious about what he's doing. Mm-hmm. He's very thankful that he has, because he's blind. He's this blind guy, which of course is a reference to the scene in the original Frankenstein. Frankenstein, yeah. So he's this blind guy who welcomes the monster, and it's all played for physical comedy. The soup that's poured into the monster's lap, the lighting of the cigar when he lights his thumb, the smashing of the wine, breaking the glass, all that stuff is played for great humor. And Hackman is so brilliant in it. And apparently that last line he says at the end when he's like, the espresso, or
I was going to make espresso.
Is improv.
And also, because I always like to talk about some of the filmmaking aspects.
Yes, of course.
Is that a lot of time people think that the laugh comes from the funny thing that happened. And frequently the laugh comes from the reaction shot to the funny thing that happened. And Peter Boyle in this scene, again with no dialogue, he is selling these laughs. Like his look, the moment that the goblet breaks is so funny. Just the sort of, oh, God.
The look into the sky.
Yeah, it's
you got to be kidding me.
Like, come on. It's so damn funny. And it's really what's selling what's selling.
Well, it humanizes the monster, right? For all his inability to speak and his like kind of primal movements, he has these very natural human reactions.
I just was hungry and you poured hot soup on my crotch. He's so funny. Yeah. It's interesting. I think this is probably Mel Brooks' most stylish movie by far.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't think of Mel Brooks as someone who has interesting visual style. That's not what we think of him for. And yet, this film, they really wanted to be true to the James Whale original and capture that. They insisted. So there was Columbia didn't want them to shoot it in black and white because movies in black and white don't sell. And so he insisted on that, which is why they went over to MGM. And they get I forget his name. I have it in my notes of the great cinematographer Hirschfeld. I think I'm not seeing it in my notes right now.
Yeah. Hirschfeld, you're right on that.
And they said, okay, we want, that we really want to get into this original James Whale look.
Yeah.
And then when they're building sets, they're like, we got to go build the lab.
Yeah.
And where are we going to find the stuff to build the lab? Well, it ends up the guy who built the original lab, still alive, a guy named Kenneth Strickfaden.
Yeah, Strickfaden, yeah.
And he still had all the old stuff sitting in his garage in like Venice Beach.
Yep.
And they picked up all the weird electric, things with buzzy lights and spinning things, and that's how they built the set.
And they gave him credit on the film, which he never got on the earlier films. So that's such a great, these are these great moments where people understand, people are coming to revere film.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like the movement that had been building through the 60s and 70s. There's just a very small example of how filmmakers were starting to understand how much to revere film, and the technicians who had created these films that they all fell in love with as kids or growing up through their lives, Such a great little thing to do for him.
Well, and Mel Brooks, and listening to him in commentary track and other interviews I've heard with him, he really believes in collaborators. He believes that this is a collaborative process, and he gives tons and tons of credit away.
Yeah.
I had a professor when I was in theater school, and one thing he told me that was always stuck with me, he said, a director can never give away enough credit.
Yeah.
Because if the movie's good, the director gets all the credit. If the movie's bad, the director gets all the blame.
Yep.
And so your job as a director is to acknowledge all the other people that are going to get lost. And Mel Brooks does that throughout.
Yeah.
He talks about the makeup people, the costume people, he talks about all the actors, the cinematographer, sound people, music people. He loves all those people and respects their work.
And those are the directors we love. Tarantino does the same thing. For all his talking, which we'd referenced when we were doing Reservoir Dogs, he does give credit to everyone else and all the performances and all the actors and the people who help him and the writers and the producers to bring his visions to life. And those are the best directors. Those are the ones you really, really love. Scorsese does the same thing. Like, he swears by Thelma Schoonmaker all the time.
Yeah.
And because they understand. The good ones really understand what it takes to make it.
Film is too hard.
Yes.
Too complicated. You cannot do everything alone. And anyone who believes they can, and any director who thinks, "Oh, I am the genius creating all things," that person is lying to themselves.
Yes,
that's not how it works.
No,
There's
of course
just
not.
way too many variables, and particularly in a comedy. Like, one of the things in a comedy is what's funny on the page might not be funny on the set.
Yeah.
My understanding is the first cut of this film was like twice as long,
3 hours,
and they thought it was terrible.
Yes.
And they had to go through and they had to cut out all the stuff that's not funny.
Well, this is funny because this is something you brought up earlier, the 5 jokes a page.
Yeah.
They said this, for every 5 jokes, they kept one. Because there's so many that didn't work within the scenes, of four jokes at a time that didn't work within scenes. And then yet these random jokes that don't work for me now, like the walk this way thing, that doesn't work for me anymore. It did when I saw it. But you're watching it, you go, oh, that's so stupid. But when they were making the film, you understand that it was funny at the time to do it that way, and it works because it's a dumb little joke on both their parts.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? That Gene Wilder's so willing to do it, and then Igor needing to establish a certain level of alpha makes him do it, and then they both understand what's going on.
And we know that we're being silly.
Yes,
We the audiences knows that the filmmakers know that they're being silly.
Yeah.
Well, so you know the interesting trivia about that moment?
No.
So Aerosmith is taking a break from recording.
What?
Or maybe you're on a concert tour and they
Yeah.
go to see Young Frankenstein, and that is where the song "Walk This Way" comes from.
Get out of here!
That, according to the internet, that is the inspiration for that song.
Wow,
is that moment?
How funny!
I was debating whether I was going to bring it up, but because you brought up the moment, I was like,
No.
"Oh, we've let it in."
Yeah.
Apparently, that's the case.
Well, there's so many great This is the thing about this movie, and this is why we wanted to talk about it. And I hope I can speak for you too, Steve. Is like,
Never speak for me.
oh, I apologize. Or I'll just speak for myself. One of the reason we love this film is all the great bits within them, and they're so earned, they're so perfect. And if you've seen the original source material, you get the joke. But once again, the best comedies that do this kind of stuff, these homages, walk that line between respecting the source material and yet finding the inventive ways to make fun of it because you're all in on the joke.
Absolutely,
I think
and you
Mel
did
does a
you
great-
did speak for me
Oh,
perfectly.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, because it's funny. There's sort of two approaches to satire.
Yeah.
One approach is I think this thing is really stupid, and I need to make fun of it and break it to pieces to
Right.
show how dumb this thing is. And the other approach is I love this thing.
Yeah.
And I love it so much, and there's so much that's funny about it that I can make fun of, but it's done out of love.
Yeah.
And the perfect example of this for me, and maybe we'll do this movie at some time, is Galaxy Quest.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so good, and it so shows that they understand what's funny about Star Trek, and they love Star Trek.
Yes.
Because that movie is both really, really funny.
Yes.
And a really good Star Trek movie.
Absolutely,
It's
it is.
structured- and this one's the same thing.
Yeah.
Is that they understand why Frankenstein is silly and ridiculous, and they know how to make fun of it.
Yeah.
And they clearly love Frankenstein.
They didn't have the little girl moment, right? There's no little girl moment from the film, which is in the original, right? That where he drowns her, and that's the reason the villagers go nuts. So they had to find a new way to get him to be, to want the villagers to want to burn him and come to the city. And that's what's so fun. Out of nowhere, Madeline Kahn shows up, out of nowhere in the time frame. She shows up, kind of throws a wrench in everything that's going on, and then gets taken by the monster. And so we get to that quote unquote rape scene that you're talking about that is very funny. And because I think it's done in a harmless way. Like I'm not saying rape is harmless. This is a very difficult thing. This is a minefield I'm speaking through right now. But like, you get the idea that it's done for laughs in a way that's not necessary, not offensive. I think.
I think in the way the movie is made,
Yeah.
the way the characters approach it,
Right.
the way we perceived it at the time,
Right.
it is a funny scene.
Yes.
And it's only looking at it through today's eyes that I go, huh.
Yeah.
How would we feel? Would we make this scene today? How would we feel about this scene? And it's an interesting, we're at a time in history, which I think is good, where there are a lot of people whose voices have not been heard.
Yes.
And we're sort of, in things that we thought might be funny in the past, we're going, maybe we have to examine that and be more
Yeah.
sensitive. And that's really a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm always nervous. I hate censorship. And so I'm always nervous. And comedy is so powerful in helping us look at human foibles
Yeah.
that I'm always nervous with the idea of like, oh, now we shouldn't do things anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to examine them.
Yeah, and it's a taming of the shrew moment, and it's built up because of how Madeline Kahn is presented throughout the film.
Right.
Very like she's basically kind of a pseudo villain, not necessarily that she's trying to actively stop Gene Wilder, but his desires for her are so available, so open, so obvious, yet her rejection of him is equally obvious,
Right.
And so when the moment happens, it's been built up in a way that makes sense for us. And so when she gives into it, which is real quickly, it's very funny. It's
Very
because of how the singing is brilliant.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
It's interesting you bring up Taming the Shrew, because Taming the Shrew is a perfect example of this as a very beautifully written classic play of Shakespeare that is really sexist.
Yes.
Really sexist.
Yeah.
The story of Taming the Shrew is essentially here's this woman who needs to shut up and do what her husband says.
Right.
That's essentially the structure of the play.
Right.
And that's problematic today. And yet we still do it.
We do still do it.
Yeah.
Because they find the nuances within the language that can infer other things. Because he does love her. He does love her.
Eventually.
Yes, eventually.
Not at the beginning.
And no, at the beginning it's a dare, it's a challenge, it's for fun. But then eventually he does love her and he realizes. And so that when she does what she does and acquiesces to him at the end, it's not from that place of control. It's from a different place of understanding that they love each other and they're both in on it. And I think that's what saves the play. Same thing with Shylock in Merchant of Venice.
Right.
It's what saves that. You can certainly bash the play for how it portrays a Jewish character, but then he has this moment of humanity. The speech is the bashing of the racist points of views about Jews in that moment. We are as human as you, and I think that's what works within those plays that still makes them relevant and topical today if you do them correctly.
I think that's a great point. And I think what it points out is that yes, things that come from a different time are go through the filter of the way that time perceives the world, but great artists transcend that.
Yeah.
So that we can, and I think that applies to Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I think it applies to some of the stuff we said about Reservoir Dogs and Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
Is that yes, we can acknowledge that these things happen, but it doesn't sully the movie, and it's a very small scene. I don't want to make
it really is
too big a deal about it.
Right.
What do you think the influence of this film is? And it's hard to say. I'm not sure that I have an answer for the question.
Well, I think like you mentioned, satire is when it's done really well, I think it inspires a lot of comedians. I think it inspires a lot of filmmakers because it gives you a template to follow, and I think what this film does is lay that out for you. And I think Mel Brooks' career lays that out for you. Spaceballs, you mentioned Galaxy Quest. Spaceballs is an amazing takedown of Star Wars. I mean, one of the funniest. It recently.
I couldn't get through it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe
my
I should
God,
try again.
It still works for. That's because you're a Star Trek guy. You're a Star Trek guy, man.
I don't think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Star Wars.
Okay.
I love Star Trek more.
All right.
I don't know.
Do you know where Cloud City is?
What was it? You told me before.
Bespin, yeah.
Bespin.
But yeah, I mean, see, not everybody does it. All right, I just want to make sure. But like those kinds of things, I think that's what the films. I don't know if there's necessarily a concrete legacy. I just think and Mel Brooks' entire career is a template for doing satire correctly. Weird Al Yankovic comes along not that later after this, and I would not be surprised if Mel Brooks was an absolute influence on Weird Al Yankovic because he does great satire of these amazing songs, and still those songs work separately. And I think that's what's so great about satire, film satire that's done well. The films stand alone. You don't have to necessarily have watched the source material to necessarily enjoy the film, but it helps.
My guess is today way more people have seen Young Frankenstein than seen
Probably.
That'd be my guess. They've seen images. They know the iconic look of the monster or the iconic look of Bride of Frankenstein and so on. But whether or not they've sat down and watched that movie, I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing that occurs to me, and I'm not sure if I can articulate it quite right, is that comedy exists within a certain time, and that the Mel Brooks style of comedy, which is very shticky, it very much comes out of that Catskill Jewish Yiddish theater tradition. When time moved on, Mel continued doing the same thing, and it didn't work anymore as well. And
I think Spaceballs is his last one.
Yeah. And watching, I actually think it might be History of the World, which is the one before.
Okay.
And that if someone were to try to do that style of comedy today, it wouldn't work.
Well, Galaxy Quest is probably the most recent, and that was like years ago.
Well, that's a satire, but I don't know if it has that Jewish shtick.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Saying that whatever that Mel Brooks style of comedy is, that works at this moment. And then it doesn't, and that it's very fleeting. It's a comedy more than anything else. You can watch a classic film and really have a lot of ways the same experience someone might have had then.
Right.
But watching a comedy was very loaded, connected to a moment.
What I would argue, though, Steve, also is that the comedy nowadays is not Jewish influence. I think comedy back then was very much Jewish influence. As you mentioned, the cast of your show of shows, that was like a lot of Jewish people were going from the Catskills. Yeah, that's right. And it was all great. A lot of the comedy that you see nowadays uses that as a foundation, as a base, but a lot of comedians aren't Jewish, I don't think, and have that Jewish kind of approach. Even though Sandler is.
The Jews are still there.
Yeah, of course, but
you can't get rid of us.
Who's trying to? No one's trying to, but I mean, you don't.
You, sir.
You don't feel that Borscht Belt influence in the stuff that you see nowadays, even from Sandler, who is Jewish. And, it was one of the most prolific, whether you like his films or not, prolific Jewish comedians working today.
Oh, yeah. So I mentioned my teacher, Sam Denoff, this guy. So what he said, because I was in film school in the mid-'90s, and what he said, because, by the way, if you look at your show of shows and the Dick Van Dyke Show, which Carl Reiner created, is that the heritage of those shows goes down through all of television. So that the people that worked on those went and worked on Mary Tyler Moore. And from Mary Tyler Moore, you get all those spinoffs. The Norman Lear, also Jewish guy, you get all of those spinoffs. And then you get like Charles Burrows, and you get Taxi, which leads you to Cheers, which leads you to Friends and Seinfeld and all this stuff. So there's a lineage here. And what Sam said is that in the mid-'90s, he said, oh, well, now what's happening is the Jewish comedians, the Jewish comedy writers are being replaced by the gay comedy writers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it's right when Will and Grace is happening and Frasier. And I was like, oh, this is a change in the style of humor has happened. Because, the Jews ran comedy. In Hollywood for a really long time. And I'm not making a value judgment on any of this. It's just that, these new voices are coming in and the style of comedy changes. And Mel Brooks obviously is a very, very Jewish sensibility in terms of humor.
There's a comfort level in that comedy for me because I grew up with it. Like, I love stumbling upon an old Rhoda episode or a Mary Tyler Moore episode or, Cheers Still. Oh my God, Cheers Still. To me, I will fight anyone to the death in a cage match about Cheers. It is still the best sitcom ever made, and I will take nothing, no arguments against it. I just really won't. There's too much.
I guess I can't say anything.
Just say other than you agree. Yeah, no.
Yes, sir.
But there's a comfort level in that comedy because the comedy is warm. It's playful. It's fun. It can be biting. And we haven't even talked about Kenneth Mars in his portrayal of the police chief or the lieutenant or the detective that's there at the time.
Wooden armed.
Yeah, I think that's his little dig at authority. I think that portrayal. I think that what Mel does with that, where he's kind of a guy who's a little too involved in his power, but kind of not that smart, yet has these weird moments where he is messing with the villagers to rile them up, and then when he gets confronted by a more powerful force, which is the monster who is now switched brains with Gene Wilder, he backs down. And he doesn't quite go after him. And so it's a little bit of a playfulness in that this authority, about how authority doesn't necessarily is necessarily the smartest people on the planet. And I think that's a little bit of a dig there.
There's no question. And that's classic Jewish humor.
Yeah.
This comes from the shtetl. This comes from Eastern European Jewish comedy where Jews were isolated and how they made fun of the powers that be. It's like right in line with that stuff. I feel like we can't, as we're coming to the end now, we have gone 50-something minutes and have not mentioned Mary Shelley, which I feel we should mention.
Yeah, absolutely.
That Frankenstein is
the source material.
Is one of the great archetypal stories. It is usually cited as the very first science fiction story, and it was created when Mary and her husband Percy Shelley, the famous poet, and Lord Byron are on a camping trip, and they're sitting around a campfire trying to scare each other with stories. That's where Frankenstein comes from, and it is a story that has echoes throughout history in all, the idea of the monster, of the mad scientist, this all comes from Mary Shelley.
Yeah, it's a Penny Dreadful now that's on TV. It's on Showtime, rather. That has Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster in it. Yeah, it's a very powerful story that still works. It's transcendent. Like it's transcendent among generations. Like it's timeless in its way because we are constantly always trying to discover how we can improve life, how we can create life, how we can do life in a different way. And I think that's what it speaks to, the science nature of it, always trying to create these things.
Absolutely. So any final thoughts?
Other than I recommend seeing the film, absolutely the filmmaking. Look at the little circles, the little fade into circles that he does through the movie. Like, these are all little things that give you a feeling and a vibe about the old films that he is doing a satire of. And I think they're so deftly done that it makes you love the film. The small things and the big things. That's what I would say why the film works. Both those things work in the comedy, and they make you enjoy the film so much more.
Yeah, and the thing I'd be really curious about is for those of you who haven't watched it, particularly for those listeners who are younger than me and John,
sure,
I would love to hear if you think this is funny.
Yeah.
How does this hold up for people who haven't seen it before?
Right.
If you want to reach me, you can reach me at SR Morris. And what we'd love to hear, by the way, is your suggestions for other shows, movies you'd like us to take a look at.
Yeah, we've got a list of our own, but we definitely are open to looking at any. We want to keep this show interactive, so we'd like to hear any films that you all like. And if we get a film that is consistently mentioned by a number of people, I'm sure it'll make us look at it and put it on the schedule. You know, it's something we definitely want.
And by the way, you might think we totally missed the boat on Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And you could tell us what the hell we got wrong.
Yeah, tell us if you hated the film and why. We're certainly open to it. You know, it's not like we can't have that discussion.
And John, where can they reach you?
Oh yeah, you guys can find me at The Rocha Says. That's ROCHA. You can see all the shows I'm hosting, including Jedi Alliance over on the Popcorn Talk Network and the Top 10 Show on the Collider Schmoes Know podcast network as well.
All right, so that's it for this week, and we look forward to talking to you again on the Cine-Files.